You're listening to IOE Insights, the UCL Institute of Education podcast at University College London.
This is Academia SR, the podcast for anyone and everyone figuring out life in academia.
This is Academia EL, the podcast for early career academics. I am Zeinab El Khateeb. I'm a lecturer in teacher education at the IOE, UCL Faculty of Education and Society. In this series of episodes, we are going to hear stories about academic journeys, achievements, and legacy, which we hope will inspire you to embark on your own adventure as an early career researcher. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Jasper Green, the Head of Initial Teacher Education at the IOE. Dr. Jasper, welcome. Nice to have you here with us, and thank you for joining us today.
It's great to be here, Zainab. Thank you for inviting me.
Pleasure. Firstly, it would be helpful if you could provide the audience with an overview of your academic journey and progression to the present day.
Okay. I think it's an interesting question to think about where my academic journey begins. I think you and Alison would probably say right in the early years. I don't disagree with that, but I think particularly the most sort of significant moments for me were in secondary school towards the end, where I had a really amazing biology teacher called Frances Myers, and she introduced me to the subject.
Yeah.
And I think there were two things that happened. One, I became actually successful at school, and up to that point, I hadn't really felt that. But I became particularly interested in the subject of biology, areas such as evolutionary biology and botany. Those are things that I suddenly became really keen to understand. And from that, I went to University of Oxford and studied biology. And within that program, I had the opportunity to do a research project. So coincidentally, that is down the road here from UCL, and it was part of UCL back then called the Rain Institute.
Yeah.
And it was a medical faculty or a medical research centre. And I was just there to do a short project. But the actual work I went to do didn't work. So it was meant to do some sort of lab work. That didn't work. But it was a time when they were starting to sequence organism genomes. And I became really interested in thinking about whether the protein the lab was studying, which was called stomatin, was present in other organisms. So I was able, through searching databases of genome sequences, to see what organisms contained this protein. So that was my sort of induction, if you like, into research. And I got to the end of university and I was like, okay, so where do I go? Do I pursue a career in scientific research, or do I pursue a career in teaching? And I took a decision.
Very hard decision, isn't it?
It was a hard decision.
We can do both.
Well, it's sort of exactly. And at that point, I don't think that was actually, I wasn't aware of the field, particularly of science education research. That was until I came here. So many years ago, I did my own PGCE here at the Institute of Education. So it was a science PGCE. And that was a time that sort of started to galvanize my interest in science education research, how children learn, thinking very much about misconceptions, which is something that I actually held many of the misconceptions we were learning about, thinking about how we could address these through our teaching, thinking about the aims of science education. All of those interesting questions were suddenly open for discussion. And it was a great year that so many of the seeds that have continued to grow throughout my career and interests. But I then left IOE. I then worked in London for a short period of time as a teacher. And then the opportunity came to complete a PhD up at the University of York. And that was a funded 4-year PhD for me to continue the research I'd started in my undergraduate.
Yeah.
So I took some time away. So I went to York.
Interesting.
Yeah, I moved to York.
Lovely.
A lovely part of the world.
Of course, yes.
And I loved it. It was 4 years where I could spend time thinking really deeply about evolutionary biology. It involved both lab work, but also developing phylogenetics and building evolutionary trees. And that's relevant because that's informed something I did later on. But I got to the end of that junction in my life and I thought, okay, now what do? Do I continue in science research, or do I continue a career in teaching? And again, I hadn't really thought about science education, but I took a job down in London and I became a science teacher again. I worked in schools, became head of department. And then as I was doing that, I undertook a master's at King's College London. So that was an MA in science education. So that was
at King's College as well.
You did as well. Okay, so we both did. What did you do there?
In modern languages, which is, my career. And it was 2007 on that time.
Goodness, I have to get my CV out to think I did it. But I did it part-time while teaching, and it did take a long time.
Same, yeah, of course.
But it's worth it, because you can sort of think about how your practice relates to your theory, how the theory relates to your practice. And that really opened my eyes, I think, to some really important aspects of science education, like cognitive acceleration through science education. That was research carried out there. And Rosalind Driver's, some of her work. So, and just lots of research that was centered around science education, I became aware of, and it became a really interesting space.
Eye-opening, isn't it?
Eye-opening and very motivating. And thinking about these questions that are, not just theoretical, but applied to my practice in classrooms. So I completed that, and then that led me to here as a senior teaching fellow, and then later on now head of initial teacher education.
Wow. It's an amazing journey, and it really shows the impact of one teacher.
Yeah.
How a great teacher can impact, the whole of the journey. It's
totally.
Interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
And the disposition to learning. Yeah. Science isn't something I find particularly easy. Through whatever happened in terms of how, Francis Myers sort of opened up the world a little bit to not just, it wasn't about passing exams, it wasn't just about learning information. It was really making sense of that, thinking, forming a sense of an identity within that subject.
Yeah.
And that is something very much that I know the Institute stands for today, and something that I am absolutely passionate about promoting, that level of subject specificity in terms of the professionalization of teaching.
And that leads to the next question. What professional accomplishment or initiative do you consider the most significant to date, which is very much related to what you've discussed, but maybe in more detail?
Yeah, I think probably in about 2020, I wrote a book. And
wow. Is that before or after pandemic?
It was sort of during. Some of it was during.
Excellent. As well. That's amazing. So, yeah.
I started writing it before when you're working here, and then that continued into the pandemic. And so it was a book. Well, it still is a book. It still exists. So that's something quite, that whenever you write something, it's quite a personal thing.
Of course.
And a book is really quite an endeavor to actually complete, because there's so many sort of tensions. I think whenever you write anything of that length, there's a lot of tensions about what you include and what you don't include.
Absolutely.
As you write it, your ideas change. So for me, that book was a way for me to put down onto paper everything that I had sort of thought about over the past 10, 15 years working in science education, about what it means to teach science well, and thinking about how we can support people who are coming into the profession, who, planning lessons, for example, is an incredibly complex process. And what frameworks can we provide, or I provide through this book, to support new science teachers coming into the profession to plan science lessons. So the book really was focused around big ideas, really trying to support children to develop meaning in science, and supporting science teachers to plan those kinds of lessons.
Oh, interesting. Did you write it by yourself, or did you have any help or support?
That's a good question. I wrote it by myself, but it was a culmination of many people's ideas. And I think that's the thing. Really, a book, when you write a book, you're borrowing people's ideas, really, and some of them are your own. But a huge amount of influence over the years have been colleagues I've worked with, both here at the Institute, but also in schools, discussions around what might be working, why might it be working. So all of those conversations I've been having, all of those thoughts, was opportunity to sort of bring them all together and to try and organize that material into what I hope is an interesting book that is also practical. So it's something that science teachers new to the profession or existing science teachers can use.
Was it part of your PhD or before?
No, so it came after my PhD.
It's nothing to do with the PhD.
No, nothing to do with the PhD.
Lovely.
Although I probably draw on certain things from
Because
it.
some doctors, they do the PhD, they publish a book, isn't it? But it's good. Okay, so was there an individual or more than one individual who inspired you intellectual development? And did the research focus align with your interests? It can be 1, 2, 3, multi-individuals. You've already mentioned about your biology teachers, so...
Yeah, I think there'll be many individuals throughout
my
sort of life who have supported my intellectual development. And I think it's interesting to think why and what that sort of involved. But I think it's almost a sort of fantastic combination of both providing that support and being an advocate for me, but also providing that level of challenge. And that I remember who's had an impact on me. They're people who have often fed back on my writing and really posed some really good questions about why I'm saying something, or this isn't clear, or have you thought about this? And the precision of those questions and the impact they can have is, I think, quite profound when you provide feedback on work. And I think many people at the Institute, I think of Ralph Levinson, I can think of him all the way back in the day when I was in a PGCE classroom, so it was 20 years ago, just posing sort of problems, if you like, for us to think about. Posing, drawing a tennis ball on the board and asking us to label the forces, what happens when a ball has been released from the hand. And they're very simple questions, but they're questions that promote a huge amount of thinking, reorganization of ideas. And I think it's not that one example, but it's what that illustrates just generally around thinking about what does it mean to learn science and what does it mean to teach science. And it's people who have perhaps reorganized and changed how I think about things that have made a big difference.
Yeah. And that's very important feedback. It feeds you forward.
Absolutely.
For you to think, isn't it?
Yeah, and the sort of thinking about you can have feedback who just improves you on that particular task, which can be helpful. But then there's feedback that you remember that comes back to multiple tasks. Yeah. So it has a long-lasting effect. And
for further stuff to bite, isn't it?
It has an ongoing relevance.
You hear that question in your head.
I don't know about you. When I write, sometimes I can hear those voices in my head saying "focus" or
of course,
sharpen this.
Yeah, of course. I get it all the time from my PhD supervisor. Which, lovely. What academic advice do you have for early career researchers? This could be staff, student, or staff and the student. Like we have staff with 2 hats, including myself.
I think focus, well, that is definitely something that has resonated a lot with me throughout my sort of academic career, is focus. And focus doesn't mean it needs to become narrow. Actually, focus can promote real depth of thinking, of argument. So, the temptation, certainly my temptation, is to be over ambitious in terms of maybe a particular question I'm asking or study I want to do. And it's not all about finding out what works, or, in terms of proving something works, proving something doesn't work, but more about sort of understanding some of the qualities of the things. So I was interested once in a research as part of my MA, looking at assessment. I was trying to work out whether a particular way of assessing was better or worse. But actually, what was more interesting was to use that and really understand how people came to assess things. So it's almost like taking one step back. Don't be too quick to answer the big questions. Perhaps some of the smaller questions are more interesting and really understanding things.
It's building up this knowledge, isn't it?
Yeah, incrementally and not trying to jump too far. And I definitely, in my PhD, I was constantly looking for the big breakthrough.
Yes,
And
of course.
actually sometimes...
Towards the end, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. You're better, or I would have been better just thinking a little more in a more focused way, but trying to really understand in more detail a smaller part of the problem. I think the other things I would say is, find your voice. And for me, that's a really critical part of what academia is about. If you take an assignment or a presentation, it's really a means for you to make an argument and make a case. And when you start out, I think that can be quite challenging, especially when there are lots of sort of dominant or more expert voices. But it's really worth holding on to, really working out what it is you think, and working quite hard to arrive at that, and writing for what you think rather than what you think people might want to hear. And I think as part of that, really try to avoid orthodoxies, falling into particular camps, but be really nuanced in the statements that you make, and really make sure that they are supported both by your own voice, but obviously the research and the sort of supporting evidence. But I still think finding out voice is important, and back yourself to a certain extent. Sometimes I have wanted to write things and say things that maybe other people have not thought of, but later, as I've got old, particularly in science research,
Of course, yeah.
have actually later come out to be maybe actually I had a point, but at the time I wasn't secure enough in what I was saying.
Yeah.
And I think the third thing I would say is sort of use your experiences and interest in your research and scholarship. So whether that's researching your own practice, or I, for example, was very interested in evolutionary trees, sort of building evolutionary trees, but I was also interested in how concepts learn. And somehow the two elements, my sort of science education and my science, have come together to help me to understand how concepts evolve using my knowledge of evolutionary biology. So I think really interesting things in research happen at this interface between these sort of boundaries, and that might be your own different domains of your different sort of disciplines, but it might also be your own perspectives and your own practice. So that's where I think is interesting and exciting things can happen.
Lovely. Thank you so much. It's very interesting, very informative.
Thank you, Zeinab.
My pleasure. Thank you for joining us today. Please follow the link in the show notes to find out more about Dr. Jasper Green's work, and also to discover more podcasts from the IUE. And if you like what you've heard, please give the IUE podcast a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. This will help us to reach more listeners who may also enjoy the podcast too. I am Zeinab, and thank you for listening. Have a good day.
Academia et al. Is brought to you by the IUE's Early Career Network and IUE Marketing and Communications. The podcast is presented by Zeinab El Khateeb. The theme music was composed by Ronnie Shu, editing by Teresa Baker of UCL Educational Media, and Jason Alagan is the executive producer of the IUE podcast.
Thanks for listening. Search IOE Insights for more podcasts from the IOE.